Mr. Secretary General, again, good morning and welcome to Romania. Taking into account that this meeting it's public transmitted, so I will switch in Romanian to be easy to understand everything what I was saying.
Secretary General OECD Matthias Cormann, Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to begin by saying hello to Bucharest of General Secretary of OECD Matthias Cormann, 2 days after the vote within the OECD Council from the 25th, 26th of January, which has decided to open the talks in order for Romania to join. Also, I'd like to thank you, Secretary General, for the entire effort submitted in order to unblock the expanding of the organization. We know the essential role in obtaining the decision of the OECD Council, and we thank you in Romania's name and myself personally. Also, I would like to thank you for the letter that you have addressed in that sense, and for the text of the resolution of the Council regarding the opening of joining talks that has been attached to it. I must say that Romania has convoked the Interministerial Committee in order to join the OECD, which has approved in the 26th of January meeting to assume the attachment of Romania to the principle, values and standards of the organization as they are strengthened and developed in the 2 OECD documents within the reunion of the OECD Council at the ministerial level from Paris in October 2021, and specifically the declaration regarding the OECD vision and the ministerial declaration of the Council from 2021. Now, the values and the principles of these 2 documents will come in meeting the requirements and the solicitation that you have made in your letter, Secretary General. Also, at this current time, Romania is adhering to 6 of the 8 essential standards in order to join, which are the statement regarding the investment, the principle of corporate governance, the principle in order to develop internet policies, the recommendation of good practices in statistics, the inclusive framework of BEPS, eroding the base and changing the profit, the Global Forum of Transparency and Exchange of Information. In the following months, Romania will begin the activities that are natural deriving from joining to the codes related to liberalization. Also, our country has expressed its intention to join the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention. All of these commitments are transposed in relevant reforms for the modernization of our country's economy. Amongst the projects that Romania is already developing with the OECD is also the current economic study for Romania, which shows our firm commitment with regards to joining our country in this organization. The study is presenting a multidimensional X-ray of the socio-economic realities of Romania and is offering to the decision factors a series of extremely useful recommendations in view of implementing those measures meant to generate development and welfare on the basis of inclusive, sustainable and intelligent basis. The very first part is dedicated to the key political perspective, including a presentation of the macroeconomic situation and of the medium-term evolution, with a special focus that is being granted to the pandemic and its implication for the economy as a whole. The study includes several references that are made to the National Plan for Recovery and Resilience of Romania, which has been approved in September of last year by the European Commission, specifying the fact that this is concentrated in a correct manner on the fields where the investments are urgently needed. The reforms and investments that have been included in the plan will contribute to the development and modernization of the Romanian economy in fields such as sustainability of public financing, consolidating public administration and the resilience of the health system, ensuring social cohesion and territorial cohesion, digitizing the public administration, and many more. Also, a series of recommendations from the study itself finds an answer in the measures that the Romanian state has taken into consideration in the National Plan for Recovery and Resilience. The topic chapter that is dedicated to the business environment analysis is also including sections that are dedicated to the necessity to adapt access for financing to the needs of companies, the governance of state enterprises, or the necessity to improve judicial efficiency and the insolvency regime in order to increase business and development. The transport infrastructure and green transition are representing key fields, and their importance is being reflected within the PNRR by having the largest financial allocation of all. The study underpins the necessity of reducing the gaps in infrastructure, especially transportation, in order to increase productivity and reduce regional disparities. Within the current study, we have effectuated analysis regarding the lack of adequate correlation between the necessities that are from the labor market and competences and aspects referring to informal labor, preventing school dropout, improving education quality and professional training, promoting digital competences, especially in primary education. The Romanian authorities are aware of the requirement to improve the conditions on the labor market. There are necessary added efforts in order to increase youth participation, in order to protect the vulnerable categories, especially in marginalized communities, in order to support the programs that are made for training. In the current pandemic context, the Romanian government has adopted a series of innovative measures that are in accord with the evolution of the situations that is being recorded at the national level and also meets the requirements of the labor market, having the purpose to maintain the labor positions from the affected economic sectors and to prevent an increase of unemployment. With regards to the pension system, Romania is in full reform process. Currently, we are evaluating the law in effect and following to adopt legal measures of a nature that will ensure the sustainability and predictability of the public pension system for the medium and long term. We are correcting dysfunctionalities and inequities between different categories of beneficiaries, strengthening the contributive principles, social solidarity, and equality. The study considers that improving access to education and training represents one of the most important fields that may contribute to economic recovery and to increase the living standard. We appreciate the recommendation to accelerate measures to support students that are risking to drop from school and to lower the educational gaps, especially in the disfavored areas. The study represents a useful tool that will bring a high added value to the political decision factors, underlining in a balanced manner the efforts that have been submitted so far by our country, but offering at the same time useful recommendations in the fields of a particular importance for Romania. Amongst the main conclusion of the OECD study related to the Economic Survey of Romania 2021, we must notice the following. The economic growth is robust, but the risks are still high. The macroeconomic policies have supported the economy, and the monetary policies must stay vigilant and answer to inflation pressures. With regards to the fiscal policy, this must be adapted to the economic evolution in a fast and targeted manner. Romania must take advantage of the opportunity granted by European funding, especially on the next generation component. It is necessary to reform this public system for pensions in order to ensure public financing sustainability. Reforms may improve efficiency and equity in the taxing system. Improving access to a sanitary and educational system that is performant is clearly representing a key to the progress with regards to living standards. The economic policies should target the diminishing of the high rate of inactivity and informal economy. European funds must be used in order to answer to the social and environmental challenges, including to reduce the level of pollution. The regional disparities with regards to the living standards and the economic opportunities are high. Just like in the OECD countries, integrating people with a low level of training, especially youth or women or the Roma population, on the labor market is difficult. In view of improving performances on the labor market, it is necessary that all of the citizens to acquire adequate skills. Increasing productivity has been significant in starting with the 2010 decade, but has decelerated, has broken down. The reforms that will make businesses grow more in a dynamic way, an efficient allocation of resources and reducing disparities related to infrastructure are key elements in having gains related to productivity. Improving the regulation framework and competition framework may stimulate productivity growth. Even though financing access has improved over the last years, it is truly necessary that the SMEs be the benefits of an added support with regards to access for financial banking instruments. Increasing the regulation predictability in order to support the business environment with regards to the investment process. Continuing the fight against corruption will lead to an increase of faith in the state institution. Now, I have given you all of these elements, and what we're preparing to do is that in the next time period, we're going to absorb them in the current public policies of Romania. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary General, the floor is yours.
Domnule secretar general, aveți microfon.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, ministers, colleagues. It's a real privilege for me to be here in Bucharest today, just a few days after the Council of the OECD decided to open accession discussions with Romania. I have appreciated Romania's long-standing commitment to a strong and engaged relationship between Romania and the OECD, and indeed your long-standing commitment to become a member of the OECD. You have done amazingly well over the last few decades in growing your economy, lifting living standards for your people, lifting incomes, and indeed really enshrining the future of Romania through the European Union, NATO, and other partnerships and engagements, very much in the context of a system of values and principles promoting individual liberty, democracy, human rights, rules-based order, and indeed the rule of law, market-based economic principles. And I think it has worked exceptionally well for Romania so far. But as you know, there are still some opportunities for improvement. There's still some areas that require further work. And I would like to think, and I know that you also believe, that working together we can help take that next leap forward. And today, I guess, is one step in that journey, as I have the opportunity to present to you the economic survey of Romania for 2022. So if you don't mind, I will go through a presentation, and you know, I hope that you will find it useful. As you can see, this is the first OECD economic survey of Romania since 2002, and this just really demonstrates the significant and impressive progress that has been achieved by Romania since then. I mean, in the last 2 decades, there has been a rapid catch-up with OECD economies, despite the global financial crisis of 2007 and, in more recent times, the COVID-19 pandemic. By 2019, just prior to the pandemic, per capita GDP had reached $27,000 US, or 63% of the OECD average, which was up massively from just around 30% of the OECD average in the early 2000s. Like most countries around the world, you can see that the pandemic hit Romania hard in terms of the economic impact. In 2020, Romania's GDP fell by 3.7%, though that was less than the OECD average of 4.7% across the OECD. Romania also, I should say, Romania also managed to deal comprehensively with the consequences of COVID. You responded with a range of social and economic measures representing about 3.6% of GDP in 2020 and a further 1.4% of GDP in 2021. And as a result, you got to the pre-crisis level of GDP as early as the second quarter of 2021. And today, the unemployment rate is also nearly back down to its pre-crisis level. Economic activity has rebounded since last year, and the recovery continues. We are projecting a GDP growth of 6.3% for 2021, the year just gone, and for growth of 4.5% this year and next year. Romania will be one of the recipients of the European Union's Recovery and Resilience Facility, one of the main recipients, I should say, of the European Union's Recovery and Resilience Facility, with 14.2 billion euros in grants, which represent about 6.5% of Romania's GDP, which is really massive. And I guess like one of the key challenges here is to ensure that those funds are invested wisely and that you are able to actually have it absorbed through your economy in a way that is going to be efficient and effective. So an effective implementation of the EU-funded Recovery and Resilience Plan and the associated structural reforms, including to support the green and digital transitions, will help sustain Romania's recovery and will also help to really continue on that pathway of lifting living standards. However, there are downside risks which remain in Romania and around the world. The biggest downside risk to a sustained economic recovery continues to be future waves of infections, and in that context, the number one economic policy priority continues to be to lift vaccination rates, to get as many people in the population as possible vaccinated and boosted. And Romania sadly has one of the lowest vaccination rates in the European Union, with only around 41% of the population fully vaccinated. And as the Omicron variant spreads, efforts to accelerate vaccinations, especially in rural areas, must remain the immediate top policy priority. We understand the challenges, we understand the impact of misinformation that is being spread by anti-vaxxers and the like, but the effort to enhance trust in vaccinations by providing reliable, fact-based information and engaging with underserved communities, tackling misinformation, really is crucial. We also suggest that Romania might want to consider extending the COVID-19 vaccine certificate to access a broader range of activities and perhaps for some professions. Another downside risk relates to inflation. Inflation in Romania reached 8.2% in December last year, which exceeded the upper 3.5% limit of the central bank's target of 2.5% plus or minus 1%, mainly driven by global increases in energy and food prices. As you know, since October 2021, the National Bank of Romania has increased policy rates by 75 basis points to 2% in January, and that certainly, we believe, was appropriate. And of course, I mean, this no doubt will require continued monitoring and measures, further measures, even as required. Romania also faces some important longer-term challenges, such as large and widening regional disparities in living standards and economic opportunities. If you are in Bucharest or some of the other larger cities across Romania, you can see the thriving hubs of prosperity and innovation and people getting ahead, but social pressures do remain quite significant in marginalized communities and in rural areas. These pressures have also been compounded, it must be said, by the effects of the pandemic, and with some of those segments of the population also being the least likely to have higher vaccination rates. Another challenge is the relative slowdown in productivity from a very low base. Productivity growth has slowed, and productivity is already, if you look at the OECD average, and if you look at the comparison with some of the better performers, I mean, there really is opportunity to do better. Productivity gains are particularly important to pursue economic convergence and to continue to lift living standards, in particular in the context of an aging population. The pandemic has also worsened some of the macroeconomic imbalances with the deterioration of the fiscal position and the current account, with the budget deficit increasing to around 9% of GDP in 2020. For obvious reasons, we all understand why, and to a large degree, that was all unavoidable. The current account deficit reached 5% of GDP and deteriorated further to nearly, in 2020, and deteriorated further to nearly 7% of GDP in the third quarter of 2021. So, I mean, in terms of productivity, certainly making it easier to do business, easing some of the regulatory requirements and regulatory burdens will be an important area of focus. So let me just turn to some of the key findings and policy measures that we're suggesting. First, we need an agile fiscal policy to foster macroeconomic stability. A credible fiscal consolidation strategy should be implemented once the recovery is firmly underway. Reforming the pension system is relatively urgent, as aging-related costs will put the public debt to GDP ratio on a rising trend. You can see the red line there, which essentially is the trajectory without any policy adjustment. And then you can see the green, continuous green line, which is with a policy adjustment as recommended, and then the dotted green line, assuming that this could be combined with a higher GDP growth outcome. Growing pension costs would limit resources available for education, healthcare, social assistance, and infrastructure, which are all important for sustaining future growth. We welcome the inclusion of the reform of the pension system in the Recovery and Resilience Plan, and we do encourage you to strengthen incentives to expand working lives, to encourage people to work longer, and policies to improve the employability of older age workers. Accelerating the ongoing modernization of the tax system and administration is also crucial to improve tax collections. I mean, as you can see, tax revenues in Romania are relatively low, not necessarily just an issue of tax policy settings. It is also, to a large degree, as we see it, a matter of effective administration of existing tax policies. And I mean, this is essentially, well, lost opportunity to invest in your future growth and success, and to invest in some of the social programs that you need. Reforms to remove inefficient tax expenditures, such as exemptions from energy-related taxes, and to increase less distortive taxes, such as taxes on immovable property, could boost sustainable growth. Now, second, policies will need to address labour market challenges. While the labour market has remained resilient during the COVID-19 pandemic, the working age population is decreasing rapidly due to aging and immigration, like people leaving. Skill shortages have hampered growth in the past and will likely continue to do so in the future. So you really have to look at ways to boost workforce participation and to make sure that your workforce has the skills required to meet the needs of your economy. And the integration in the formal labour market of people with low educational attainment levels, especially among young people, women, and Roma populations is a challenge. And as you can see, participation is quite low for some groups if you compare with the OECD average. This is partially explained by the persistent inequality in education, and the Prime Minister has referenced, some of the government's efforts and thinking, in this space, and we would encourage you to continue. I mean, Romania is among countries where the socio-economic background has the largest impact on reading performance. Too many young people in Romania leave school before getting the skills they need to be able to thrive in the labour market. School closures due to COVID have further deepened the learning gaps and have also further deepened and accentuated the inequality in access to education, with children from more disadvantaged backgrounds being more acutely impacted than those from better socioeconomic backgrounds. Accelerating support to vulnerable students, therefore, we would suggest is urgent. Measures planned under the Educated Romania project and the National Recovery and Resilience Plan are steps in the right direction, and we would encourage you to continue to think about ways to do better. Much needed financial and human resources should be allocated to schools in disadvantaged areas, to remedial courses to support students in need, and to ongoing initiatives to prevent school dropouts. Similarly, too few adults have access to training, including among the unemployed. I mean, so if you look at Romania on the left in red, compared to the OECD average, and then compared to the best performers, you can see that there's a lot of opportunity there to do better. Public employment services need to be reinforced to better adapt to the changing needs of the labour market, provide individualised support and expand training programs, and more importantly, providing affordable and good quality childcare and long-term care will help boost labour market participation further, especially for women. And then third, strengthening the business environment, making it easier to do business in Romania will help to achieve stronger productivity growth. And I mean, this is a special focus of this year's survey, and we think that this is really a very important area of focus for Romania. Rising productivity is key to continue economic convergence and to continue to improve Romania's pathway to aligning with the higher standards in other parts of the OECD, and it is also an important part of improving Romania's competitiveness. According to our assessment of product market regulation indicators, Romania has more restrictive regulations than the OECD average, particularly for licensing and permits. With the support of the OECD and the European Union, Romania is currently simplifying business licenses for manufacturing activities, and that's a very good thing. But it will be important to continue on this path by simplifying and digitalizing procedures, including for the services sector. There are inefficiencies in the insolvency regime and court congestions which are hindering the reallocation of economic resources towards more productive sectors and firms. To get really maximum benefit of a market-based economy, you do need to facilitate to the greatest extent possible the efficient reallocation of capital and labor away from unsuccessful firms towards those firms with the best chance to be viable and profitable and successful and growing into the future. And if that reallocation is blocked through an inefficient judicial system, then you're leaving yourself short in terms of what you could be achieving. Introducing out-of-court proceedings, alternative dispute resolution, would facilitate the exit of non-viable firms and the reorganization of viable firms while strengthening market discipline. The rule of law is, of course, fundamental for a market economy to function properly, but the administration does need to be as efficient as possible. Recent efforts to fight corruption is, of course, very much welcome and should be extended and intensified as trust in institutions and integrity remain a major issue. And I welcome the comments the Prime Minister has made in relation to this particular issue and the intention to join the Anti-Bribery Convention. Further infrastructure investments, particularly in the transport and the energy sectors, will be important to boost Romania's economic potential. Again, you can see how you compare to the OECD, but also to your peers in your more immediate neighborhood. And last but not least, Romania needs to continue improving its environmental outcomes. Yes, I mean, Romania has done very, very well, has made impressive progress in recent times. But you can see, I mean, you're tracking at a lower level of emissions than the EU equivalent in terms of per capita emissions. So the emissions intensity of your economy is lower than that of the EU. But in terms of reaching the net zero objective by 2050, you can see there the trajectory that still lies ahead. I mean, greenhouse gas emissions in Romania have more than halved since the early 1990s. I mean, I think, you know, for obvious reasons, you've been able to significantly modernize your manufacturing, operations and the like, and as such, that has had a massive impact, and that's welcome. But there is more work to be done on that front. And reducing air pollution is going to be important too. It is a major environmental and health hazard in Romania, associated with a comparatively high number of premature deaths. Policy action, we would suggest, should combine green investments, which account for 41% of the Recovery and Resilience Plan, with incentives to reduce environmental damages and, if needed, accompanied by compensation measures for low-income households. Prime Minister, colleagues, I hope you find our findings and recommendations useful in helping you to chart the future path of reform. The OECD looks forward to continuing to engage with you. We appreciate the fact that there is broad political support from across the political spectrum for Romania's engagement with the OECD, and we will do everything we can to engage positively and constructively with you and to help you be the best you can be. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General, as well. As we discussed before this meeting on our bilateral meeting, we have already established the interministerial committee, which is going to focus on all these recommendations and I would like you to rely on our commitment to do our best in order to meet the OECD standards and to become a full member as soon as possible. Thank you very much for it. Thank you. Mai dorește cineva să intervină? There is somebody who wants to say a few words. Cum? Ok. Domnul Dean, vă rog.
Domnule prim-ministru, domnule secretar general al OCDE, distinși audiență.
Prime Minister, dear General Secretary of OECD, dear guests, it is a privilege for me to be able to participate to this launch of the survey on Romania. We are living through difficult times under the burden of a number of shocks that have ravaged well-developed economies.
Ok. Funcționează. It's working.
Șocul prețurilor la energie care a readus în minte stagflația de acum câteva
The shock of energy prices, which have brought back the perspective of stagflation a few decades ago, which is also assessed through the perspective of transition was a green economy, but not the least the geopolitical background. The features of this time are illustrated by key topics on the OECD agenda, such as an organization which promotes best practice in terms of governance, free economy, guided by justice, inclusion, and a better relation between the human being and nature. Everyone could see that even the richest societies were not exempted from difficulties in taking the shocks above mentioned. Not by accident, OECD as well as other specialized international organizations, IMF, World Bank, IAB, underline the importance of trust in the relationship between those who are governing and society. Where institutions operate better, the capital of trust gets is less erosion, and the society can mobilize easier in face of adversity. The analysis provided by the OECD experts is also added to a number of other reviews performed by specialized bodies. I can underline that the review organized after the global financial crisis was the result of a simplifying paradigm, trying to better deliver a snapshot of the relation between the market organizations and the innovation. To all this, we can add the steady attention provided to the fight against corruption and promotion best practice in the public sector, defending the rule of law. A serious review has been delivered in this survey in terms of importance of reducing the economic gaps, operation of markets, public policies, the place that SMEs should take in the economic environment, the development of IT sector, social and demographic issues, regional economic disparities, social cohesion. We should underline a key finding of the survey, according to which in less than 20 years, Romania was able to decrease the GDP per capita gap compared to the OECD average from 60 to 30%, and the population threatened by poverty and social exclusion decreased from 30% in 2020 to 50% in 2010. Quite a number of information in this survey, which is able to prove economic progress recorded by Romania, as well as important downsides, such as those recorded in the education and public health sectors. I should underline only a few elements regarding to the current status of the Romanian economy. The issue of external balance of the economy. The GDP per capita has reached almost 70% of EU average. However, key imbalances are still there. The current account deficit was around 5% in 2019, and in 2020, and probably more than 6% in 2021. In the EU, there are just a few economies with a more significant current account deficit. The external imbalances was mainly fueled by the structural budgetary deficit. to which we can add the effects of pro-cycle nature of budgetary policies. Romania needs investments able to better place itself in the international production chains. The OECD report also underlines the need for fiscal consolidation that public finance sustainability depends on. In Romania, it's not the public debt, which is a little bit less than 50% of GDP at the end of 2020, and represents the biggest concern, but the structural budgetary deficit. A gradual fiscal adjustment makes sense, especially that we were not able to get rid of the pandemic situation, and the economy is still fragile. Fiscal correction results to more stricter monetary policies all over the world. However, decreasing the low cost of credits, the drastic reduction of budgetary deficit, inflation stopped, if possible, tomorrow, and high economic growth is only a fantasy.
To try to limit the damage and the pain, the Central Bank of Romania does not issue reserve coins and cannot afford not to strengthen the monetary policy, which must take account of the steps that the Fed has made, other central banks in the region, and the general evolution on the monetary market at large. The budget deficit was 6.7% in 2021. The cash one. The firm correction of the fiscal deficit is the way to calm down the financial market. If we will exemplify in taking value of the European resources, we will attenuate the fiscal consolidation contractionist impact. The high inflation is mentioned in the study. We're referring here to its persistence and the possibility to be influenced in the basis of the basic inflation. In Romania, the shock of the energy pricing is the basic cause that will lead to chain effects. The trouble is related by the deregulation that is accentuated in the production chain and the geopolitization of the energy market, because in the EU there is no unitary energy market, and there is no, when it comes to the dependency of the Russian Federation, it's a great vulnerability. Romania must ensure in a smart way its resources and involve the energy security and food security. The climate change, which involves a relatively high price of energy, until we get another portfolio of resources, is in it of itself a huge shock, especially when it comes to energy-consuming industries and a lot of numerous citizens with low income. And here we have a reasoning that is related in the importance for the PNRR, which is underpinned by the OECD studies, as well as this configuration of a transition that will make this shock available. It is the basic ground of the exceptional measures taken by the government for the winter months, taking into consideration the tensions that the shock is producing in the economy, in society. Speaking of PNRR, the NGEU is the industrial policy at the EU level with national setting depending on the specific necessity. In the US, the Biden plan is a reviving of the New Deal plan during the interbellum era. As the pandemic has pointed out, the close-knit collaboration between governments and the pharma industry in order to create vaccines, also it shows the economic challenges and technological challenges of the future, including those that are derived from the industry of AI and global competition. Romania has a great need of public investment, which will transform it structurally, and PNRR can increase the GDP potential by 1% in comparison to the historic average that has been 3.5 to 4%. Basically what we have is an exceptional infusion of resources through PNRR, but the project has to be very good in order to be used. The OECD analysis is noticing what the Fiscal Council has been complaining about for many years, the very low income of fiscal income, including the contribution, under 27% of GDP. Now, taking OECD as a benchmark, we are very low in this ranking, and we are within the EU. With such low income, it is very difficult to finance adequately education, health, building infrastructure, and to dampen any strong adverse shock. And the PNRR cannot replace that chronic underfinancing. We must be able to have our own feet when it comes to the budgetary resources. If we think about, for example, the challenges of futures that derive from climate change and the robust need for that. And I would like to say say that we must salute the OECD efforts for a fiscal regime international that is this unwanted race to the bottom, which is the fiscal optimization operated by large corporations to the detriment of national budgeting, an abuse of a position of dominance on the market. I believe that the OECD can increase the level of collaboration when it comes to the fiscal paradise, and those safe havens. So I think we can also work together when it comes to crypto actives, fake news, for cyber attacks, and all types of hybrid threats that threaten the fiscal stability and the activity of central banks. I do hope that Romania will join as soon as possible the OECD. Thank you for your attention. We also thank you. Mr. Stănică, please. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly honored and happy to be here with you and Mr. Matias Corman, the General Secretary of the Organization for the OECD for cooperation, economic cooperation, as well as high public statesmen for the events when it comes to launching the economic study for Romania that has been done by the OECD team. In the process for the team, in the national strategy for prognosis has had basically a point of interest. And we are speaking about the OECD during the missions that took place within the preparing of the studies. The study during the entire lifetime of it. I want to underpin the commitment and the quick reaction of the OECD experts when it comes to data collection and information, as well as the constructive exchange of opinions at the technical level that we've held within the context of preparing the prognosis exercises and preparing the working groups when it comes to shorter economic prospect. The Department of Economic Studies of OECD has supported Romania's efforts in order to identify the measures and the tools for economic policies that will lead to a sustainable growth. We also appreciate quite a lot the inclusion of our country, especially starting autumn 2019 in the OECD Economic Outlook and in the report Going for Growth, and would it bring an added point of visibility for Romania, and at the same time offers us the chance to learn from advanced economies about the best practices in the socio-economic reforms. The study points out in this convergence that our prognosis with the prognosis of other fiscal elements, with the increase of economic availability, both for the 2021 and for this year, prove it quite clearly. The study was examined during the reunion of the economic study of economic analysis of the OECD, being overall in agreement with the recommendation of the report. The themed chapters were more than welcome. By appreciating the importance of the statute as guests when it comes to the EDRC reunion, Romania has decided to make all the necessary commitments in order to take advantage of this opportunity and to assist when it comes to the economic debates of member states as well as partner states, so that we can extend the horizon of knowledge and collaboration in order to have a better grounding of the measures by comparative analysis and exchange of experience. Another very important fundamental element, especially when it comes to the analysis and prognosis element, is represented by the access to the OECD data, which includes important sets to statistical data from the socio-economic fields of member states, based on which we are elaborating a series of detailed studies at the highest level of scientific method on topic of interest.
Thus, Romania may benefit from an extended documentary basis on the development of micro and macroeconomic indicators at international level. Best practice examples from other countries, as these represent an important pillar in order for Romania to close down the OECD standards. On the same background, we can add the fact that currently the European Commission has been focusing ever more on collection, using and reviewing statistical data at microeconomic level. Last but not the least, I would like to underline the fact that Romania, especially on the background of the implementation of the National Resilience and Reform Plan, aims to improve and strengthen its institutional and administrative capacity. In this respect, Romania aims to implement a number of technical assistance projects together with the OECD in various sectors, with a focus on impact analysis at macroeconomic as well as microeconomic level in order to provide predictability for the business environment and for the society as a whole. Concluding, I'd like to thank the entire OECD team for the delivery of this economic survey, as well as to the Romanian side for the trust that we show to this National Committee for Forecast and Program in order to coordinate this activity. And I'd like to assure you that we are fully available to continue cooperation with the Economic Survey Department of OECD. Thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Stănică, dear Secretary General. On behalf of the Romanian government, on behalf, I'd like to thank you once more. I'd like to thank you for your personal involvement in undertaking these actions. I'd like to thank your entire team and the entire technical staff of OECD for the actions undertaken and for the objectives, for the final aim to receive the invitation letter in order for Romania's accession to OECD. Our meeting ends here, and I'd like to thank you.